here's what we're going to talk about. What is, or rather, what are OER? We're going to talk a little bit about why OER, touching on the why of OER, open educational resources for students, but also for faculty. We're going to talk about the 115, also known as the $115 million that the legislature has appropriated for zero textbook costs in the California community colleges. And we're hoping to hear from you all about what you need to make open educational resources truly work for you. I want to invite you to interrupt me, politely, of course, please. But I welcome questions. I welcome comments. I can talk really fast, and we don't want that. And I'd also, if you ask me questions, it gives me an opportunity to breathe, and that's usually a good thing. I wanted to share with you the fact that one of the things that we as faculty use when talking to other faculty about open educational resources, one of the things that we often use is quotes and things from students. And one of our colleagues actually has collected lots of information from students about textbook costs and so forth. And so one of the things that we commonly will share in presentations is quotes that really illustrate the impact of textbook costs on students to help convince our faculty colleagues of why considering OER is so important. And so we'll literally have a slide deck where when we kind of need a pause moment, we'll put one of those slides up for faculty to take a moment to read and to think about before we continue on. Because one of the things that resonates with faculty more than anything else with respect to things that faculty should consider doing is hearing from students. And that's one of the reasons that we're really happy to be here with you. And now, hopefully, I'm going to pass the mic, if you will, to my co-presenter, Julie Bruno.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. You're good.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so it's really lovely to be with all of you. I'm so sorry I'm not there in person. My flight was canceled at 9 o'clock last night, so I ended up having to return home, but I'm with you virtually. So the first thing we're going to really talk about is what are OER, open educational resources. Some of you may be very familiar with them if you've had an instructor that has put them into the classroom for you so that you've been using them already. And I would love, Michelle's in the room. Michelle, a show of hands. How many of our folks in the room have actually experienced OER in one of their classes?
Oh, almost half of them. At first it looked like first it looked like nobody, and then I saw hands go up. Awesome.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, and I see some on Zoom as well. Okay, fabulous. So we've got a definition for you. Open educational resources are teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or are released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. And that last part is the key part, the free use and repurposing. So let's go to the next slide. Why OER? Why would we want to use a resource that is free and that we can change and adapt? Well, I'm sure you are all aware of the skyrocketing costs of textbooks. They have just been on the rise, and we'll show you a graph in just a second. So one of the things that OER does is that because it is free, it allows anybody to use it. You can download it, you can print it out, but it is absolutely free to the students and the instructor to use. It is also customizable so that we can take it as an instructor and change it and adapt it however we need it to be in the classroom. We can remove things, we can add things, we can reorder things, we can add examples that would resonate with our students. We can change it up to fit both our classroom and our students in that class. So let's go ahead and take a look at that next slide, and you will see, and I hope that this is visible. I think probably the folks on Zoom might be able to see it a little bit better. But you can see that here's a chart that shows that upward tick of textbook costs over the years. The chart goes from 1998 to 2018, and you can see that there's an approximately about 170% rise in textbook costs. So we all know that it becomes burdensome to students when they have those high textbook costs that they have to deal with. Again, it's another barrier that we set up to students being in the class and getting the education that they need. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So there are some real, very significant consequences when students cannot get a textbook because of cost. And this graph here really shows some of the reasons why students, or how students are impacted with that, the lack of textbook. And I am sorry, I cannot, that it's a super small slide for me, so I'm gonna take a look. Okay, so I had to shift over to a different screen. So you can see that some students didn't bother to purchase the textbook because it was too expensive. Some, because of that textbook cost, may have to take fewer courses, or they may not register for a specific course because of that textbook cost. Some can't get the textbook, and so their grade suffers as a result, and then others have dropped. So we know that this increase in textbook costs over the years has really dramatically affected students and their ability to get the education that they want and that they need. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are some real benefits for both students and faculty when we look at using open educational resources. One of those has to do with academic freedom. And for those of you that may not be completely familiar with academic freedom, we've got a definition for you that's a good one. Academic freedom establishes a faculty member's right to remain true to his or her pedagogical philosophy and intellectual commitments. It preserves the intellectual integrity of our educational system and thus serves the public good. So when we look at OER and it intersects with academic freedom in this way, faculty in their professional judgment are able to take those open educational resources and adapt them for how they want to teach the course. Sometimes what happens with publisher textbooks is because they're constructed in such a way, a faculty member feels that they are sort of tied to that textbook when they're teaching the class. They do not have that same feeling when we're talking about open educational resources. They can take the OER and change it and adapt it, as we talked about, and they can do what's in the best interest for their students. So the publisher no longer has that ability to sort of dictate the curriculum. The faculty member is completely in charge, and one of the things that academic freedom gives us is that ability to change and adapt within our own classrooms. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So some of the benefits: customizing, improvement, perfection. We can improve explanations that may not be super clear, right? We can collaborate with others and bring in new ideas, new information. We can address biases that may exist in an OER, but because we can change and adapt, we can make that resource better for our students and for ourselves as well. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. This adaptability also allows for faculty to address IDEA, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism. So that because we're not tied to this one particular textbook in the way that it is written and compiled, we are able to use the open educational resources and actually change and adapt it. One of the things that we know about textbook is that they are primarily written by white professors from research institutions, and over 65% were male. So you can see that textbooks have a very specific lens that they are written through. When we have the opportunity to use open educational resources, we can actually change that. We can turn that on its head. We can bring in different ideas, different voices, diverse perspectives. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So it really does create the opportunity for improvements in design and authoring and publishing. We can embed culturally responsive teaching and learning in our classroom, and we can create resources that are relevant to our students. The other thing that's really exciting about open educational resources is that we can actually ask our students to contribute. So then our students become scholars. and they can actually bring their own work into those resources, and faculty can use that in subsequent classes as they continue. And I think that's really just one of the big benefits of open educational resources. It becomes less about the person who has the knowledge and more about constructing knowledge together in the classroom. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. On this slide, we've actually got some examples, and if you're interested, I think, Michelle, we can probably make those some hot links so that folks can take a look at the PowerPoint and maybe even go in and look at that biology text, the Spanish text, the psychology text. You can see that the opportunity with open educational resources is that you can change something dramatically. Like if you take a look at that biology text, you will see that they went through and changed images and case studies to reflect the student body that we learn with, right? That we're together with. The Spanish text also did some modifications on gender pronouns to make it much more inclusive. Psychology tests, again, more inclusive around gender. And then there's actually an OER about statistics for social justice studies, which just not like any other statistic textbook you've probably ever seen, right? Which is fabulous. These collaborations are really what make open educational resources unique for both faculty and students. And this is a work in progress. All of these we're continually changing and making these resources better. So let's go to one more slide and then I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Yeah, let
The
me just,
last,
yeah, let
oh
me just,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, Michelle.
yeah, let me just jump in. So,
Oh, sure.
we just finished the first draft of a document around taking a look at resources with these ideas in mind and the kind of things that faculty should be looking at and examining as they do so. And so that is out there, and our intent is to be piloting that in the near future, where we're taking resources that were out there and that were written with just that single perspective and looking at them, OER resources, and seeing how we can modify them to make them better. And these are just some examples of some things that happened before we even had a process for that, where we had faculty that were developing OER, because we've been funding faculty to develop OER or to improve existing OER. And these are just some of the things that have already happened as faculty were engaging in those things. And another thing that we have been doing is asking faculty not to work by themselves, but to actually create a team of people so that the resource that they're creating is not just designed for that one faculty member, but actually has multiple perspectives in the actual development process. And then ideally, the idea is that all those faculty members that were part of the development are also going to be adopters who would then be making that resource available to students at no cost. Sorry, Julie.
That's okay. No, thank you for the clarification. I'll just give you an example. I'm really excited that I have colleagues that are writing an interpersonal communication textbook, and we'll be using this framework to take a look at it and actually produce something that will be so much more relevant to my students in that class, that I will be able to use, and I'm really hoping I'll be able to use it next year, because right now our resources for that class are limited. So it's really exciting that we're doing this great work, and faculty from across the state are involved, which is also really terrific. So one last slide before Michelle takes over and talks about that 150 million that we've got going on. Butte College actually did a study, and it shows their question was, has the cost of required textbooks ever caused you to do any of the following? And again, this just sort of reiterates what we had talked about before. That cost takes fewer courses, drop or withdraw, fail a course because I could not afford to buy a textbook, not purchase the required textbook. OER has the capability of eliminating all of those barriers for our students, as well as improving and enhancing our curriculum and our teaching. So when Michelle says that OER is the answer to everything, for many of us, it really truly is, because it has the potential to just make us better teachers, create a better learning environment for our students, and have you all use that and have a great experience in your classes because you have relevant course materials that speak to you as individuals. All right, Michelle, I'll turn it back over to you and you can talk about dollars.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I just want to share that these are data from one of our colleges, and we have lots of our other colleges that have similar data, and we also see national data. And I'm sure you all look at this and have possibly made some of these choices or known people who made those choices. We don't want you to have to make those choices, so that's what this is all about. So, what do student leaders need to know about OER and California's $115 million investment in zero textbook cost degrees? Well, I'm going to tell you some things that I think you want to know and you should know, but we also really want to hear from you all as well. So the $115 million, if you haven't heard about it, although if you were in the session earlier, you did hear about it. These were funds that were appropriated in trailer bill language, which seems to be the way that Sacramento magically gives us money and we're not exactly sure where it came from. But that's how we got our money, so we're all for that. But these funds are there, and the first disbursement needs to happen in January or before January. So colleges are going to be getting money related to this effort to do something in the very near future. So something's going to start happening very, very soon. Lots of details have yet to be determined. And like most legislation, if any of you have taken time to look at legislation, oftentimes there's strange things in that legislation that you have to wrestle with and sometimes work on advocating for things to be interpreted in ways that make sense. Any questions before I go on? I have to say, with everyone with their masks on, it's almost like you're on Zoom, so that it's almost like, because I'm only getting the eyes. Question. Oh, you're going to question from the chat?
There is a question, yes.
Great, thank you. Oh, you are yeah, go ahead.
I had a question, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So, as cool as this all sounds, is it guaranteed that these modifications will be used ethically and responsibly? And will we still have access to the original text to compare and see what was changed? Because it almost seems like we're all going to get educated, right? But from a certain point of view.
Well, so
I feel like maybe might be missing out on some stuff.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So part of what we have now is that the point of view of who is currently writing textbooks does not reflect the diversity of the country, of our students, and so forth. And there's lots of data on that. There's studies that have looked at who the commercial publishers are. There are also studies that have looked at who the OER publishers are. And by publisher in that context, I mean the actual author. And what you see is neither it reflects the diversity of our students, of our population, and so forth. And so the idea here is that we would be looking at resources that need changes, and also ideally bringing faculty together to talk about their discipline and how their discipline represents things, and are there things that are sort of an issue or an outdated approach to things that should be addressed. And part of the beauty of OER is it's out there and you could go look at it. And if you wanted to know what kind of changes were made, you could absolutely make those comparisons. And I would imagine that as we're doing this work, we would make notes about the kinds of things that were changed and provide examples. Because of time, we didn't put actual examples in here, but we have lovely examples from that biology textbook of the kind of changes that were made. And one of the things that we can do is make the document that we developed that sort of talks about the kind of changes that need to be made, talks about those changes, and gives examples and tries to really walks through the why, what, and the how. And so we could definitely make that available to you all so you can have a look for yourselves, because we'd love your feedback. So again, thank you for that question. It was a good one. Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah.
There's I think it looks like Anna has her hand up. And Brian, did you have a follow-up question to that?
I did, if that's okay with Anna, if I ask that real quick. Okay, thank you. So my follow-up question is, and I really like how you explain that, but is it possible that either in the near future or later on down the line, right, we've all graduated and writing books and articles and things of that nature, right, that we have more diversity within the publication group itself? You know?
Well, and I mean, part of part of what really is great about OER, and also the challenge is it can always change, right? So there's no reason why if something changes in perspective and view that someone couldn't come in and change. So let's say you get done with you get done with the community colleges and you go on and now you're a professor of whatever. You can pick up that OER resource and modify it as you see fit at that time. So it's always changing. It's not static like your publisher's textbooks, and it can change like that. I mean, I teach psychology, and if I discover that my students in my OER textbook are confused by something in my textbook, I literally go into my textbook and I fix it right then and there. Or if they find something that they don't like for whatever reason, I can just fix it right there. It's really part of the power and beauty of OER.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Anna had her hand up also. Michelle, Anna, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. So I just had a question in regards to kind of what a professor's motivation would be in order to adopt OER. I know that's a difficult question to answer, but I think a lot of my professors, especially given the online space, have turned to paid websites or publishers like McGraw Hill and SciPage that physically give students the activities to complete, and it seems like the class is just run by the publisher. How would professors go about teaching either asynchronous classes or honestly just having the motivation to want to work with their colleagues to create an adapted textbook?
I so appreciate that. And one of the things that we're trying to do is always talk to our faculty colleagues and find out what do they need and how can we help them to make that change. So for the faculty member who is not motivated by the desire to provide you all with free textbooks, there are other things to talk about. I know for myself, I had one of my classes that was using OER, and I was so happy that when those little issues came up with my textbook, I could fix them. Or when I wanted to add something in new, I could just do it. And so I finally went to OER for my other class, which was a harder one to go to. And so for me, there's this power with teaching OER that I never had before. I no longer had to tell my students, ignore that section in your textbook, it's stupid. I can just take it out and I can add in the things that I think should be there. And so that goes back to that academic freedom component that Julie was talking about. It gives faculty the power to really construct the resources that they're using to teach in a way that works for them and works for their students, as opposed to having to fight with their textbook. When I first went to OER, I didn't change it at all. I just used it just like it was a commercial book. And I was making my students go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 7 to chapter 8, then back to 3, 4, 5. And I'm like, wait, why am I doing this? I'm using OER. I can just switch the chapters around. So I switched them around. And then I'm like, I hate that chapter. I'm going to get rid of that chapter. Took that chapter out, put another one in, and now I have a complete book that's in the order that I want and uses the resources that I like. So there's power for faculty that I would hope would be something that would resonate when those cost concerns don't actually factor in. And one of the things too that we always like to tell faculty, and I would tell, if you're having a conversation with a faculty member and says, oh, I heard about this, OER is changing all the time. That's one of the part of the beauty of it. Changing also in the fact that more and more resources are available. So for introductory psychology, there has been OER for years, and even options, and even with ancillaries. But for a class like lifespan development, up until not that long ago, there was nothing. And so the faculty member that looked for resources 2 years ago would never have found anything. And so it's really important to encourage faculty who have thought about it in the past to relook and see what's out there, because there are more resources all the time.
Michelle, let
Yeah.
me just add, because I want to address the other part of Anna's question. Yes, publishers give a lot of resources, and that's one of the reasons why faculty kind of move in that direction. What we're trying to do at the OERI, which is the OER Initiative, is that we're not only looking at textbooks, but we're also creating those wraparound resources for faculty so that they will have some exercises that they may use in Spanish, or activities for me in interpersonal communication, or whatever else it may be. We're really trying to build that out so that there are fewer reasons for faculty to move in the commercial textbook direction, right? We want them to come and do OER. So let's try to figure out, and we're really getting very good at sharing things among faculty also. So that's another part of that. You're right, there is that issue, and we're trying to address that as well. It'll take a little time, but we're on our way, absolutely on our way.
Yeah, we're focusing not just on developing and updating resources. Thank you, Julia. It was a really good point. But also, what do we need to make this adoption as easy for you as it is to adopt a commercial textbook? So we're really trying to think, how do we make that OER experience for the faculty member so that it's just like changing a textbook, which we do all the time anyways? How do we make the OER experience like that, particularly for our part-time faculty who don't have the time to dedicate to making those changes? All right, anything else, Julie, before I go? She's got it. Okay. We're good.
Sorry, I was muted. I
We're
did
good.
see one other person. Was there somebody else who had a question? Well, if you do, come back. We're still here. We'll let Michelle keep going. And you can see she's a fast talker, so we'll go.
Okay, so the legislation says it's the intent of the legislature that the community college districts develop and implement zero textbook cost degrees and develop open educational resources for courses to reduce the overall cost of education for students and decrease the time it takes students to complete degree programs. Sounds all good, great. So one of the things you may wonder, we're about, Julie and I, we're about OER, and that's our work, but there's a clear intersection between OER and ZTC, and so I'd like to speak to that very specifically. Open educational resources are one way to get to zero textbook cost. And we would argue that it's the best way to get to zero textbook cost, but we recognize that you can't always find open educational resources, or there may be things in a discipline that make it so that you just can't get to OER at all. And so we're very clear about that. So not all OER is ZTC, so that's something to point out. There are times where there is OER that is made available and there is a cost to it. There are actually companies that have effectively monetized OER, so that make it easier for a faculty to develop OER or to use OER, but then there's a cost to it, so it's a little bit more complicated. We know not all courses can be taught with OER. There are courses where there are copyrighted materials that you are just never going to get away from. So if we want to get those courses to ZTC, we need to figure out a different way to get them there. While OER may be the answer to everything, it does not mean that OER can do everything, but we would argue that the true goal should be to use OER whenever you possibly can. And I would argue and suggest that that was the governor's idea when these dollars came along. The reason we got $115 million came from the governor. This was him pushing it. And he has this great quote. He is committed to addressing the racket that is textbooks in this country. Usurious costs, such a good word. I don't even know exactly what it means, but it's a good word, associated with textbooks. And so we will do more this year, because we in California have an obligation to disrupt that entire system nationwide. Before the recall election, I was using this saying, if you need a one-issue reason to keep him, here it is. So the idea behind this was to really create change, not just temporarily make textbooks free for some students today, but to make textbooks free for as many students as possible for as long as possible. So we think it's really important to focus on real non-monetized OER. I just told you how sometimes there's OER that has a cost to it. We've got 150 million reasons. If you are the type of person who likes to read trailer bill language and have discovered that it's incredibly hard to find it, here's a tiny URL that will get you there. So tinyurl.com/115 FOR ZTC will get you to the trailer bill language. This is, we believe, the largest single investment in ZTC OER in the known universe. It's not verified, but it's probably true, so that's what we're going to say. And so it's really, really important that we here in California get it right and do as much as we possibly can with these dollars. And I would argue that the right way to spend these monies is to focus on system-wide systemic change, not creating new inequities. And by that I mean, when we had funds previously for zero textbook cost resources, only a few of our colleges got those money, specifically 32 out of the 112 or 113 that we had at the time, as opposed to every college working towards ZTC for all of its students. We also want something that's sustainable. If you buy something today and it has to be updated tomorrow and you don't own it, it's not sustainable. Whereas with OER, you update it today, you need to update it in the future, but it's as sustainable as the discipline, as long as the discipline doesn't change, and you can build in cycles to review and use that $115 million towards doing updates later in the future. There's nothing to prevent that from happening. So then you do have a resource that's sustainable as long as you have that mechanism for updating it in place. And we would hope too, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah.
there is a question.
Yeah.
It looks like Lisa has a question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Lisa.
Yes, it's Lisa. Can you hear me? I'm having technical difficulties. I'm sorry.
We can hear you. Yep.
Yes, I wanted to know, within the budget, does the language include alt media for students that have disabilities?
Oh, what a great, yeah. Go ahead. Finish your question. Go ahead.
And also, who would have control of that? Would the teacher be responsible, or would the student be responsible going to like a different entity, like the disabled services or another part of the college? Would the teacher have to offer that initially to the students, or would the student have to go through another hoop to get that service?
So,
At budget language.
yeah, so what I can speak to is what the budget language, what it does say, and then some of that is sort of separate around institutional responsibilities for ensuring student access to resources. But the budget does specifically specify ensuring that all resources developed are accessible. And one of the things that we have faculty saying, we need more help with accessibility. We need to be able to find an OER that we want to use and discover that it's not accessible, and then have a place to get it made accessible so that it can be used by that faculty member, other faculty members, and all the students who can benefit. So that is absolutely in there, and I can attest to the fact that our faculty across the state are very, very sensitive to those issues, and OER tends to be looked at with greater scrutiny to ensure that it's accessible. And we're really trying to make sure we're always rising to address that need and even go above and beyond, and to actually be better than the publishers are. That's something that we've really, really been focusing on. Great question. Thank you. All right. So we hope that we're talking not just about zero textbook costs, but we're also talking about better teaching. And there's a whole concept around open pedagogy and really in bringing students into developing resources and really making the resources that we're using respond to students. And so that's very much related to open educational resources, and that's something that we hope happens along the way as well. So why should OER become the preferred way to become ZTC? I feel like I kind of said this already, but we have the power of things being open, that academic freedom, equity, student success, sustainability being a huge issue. We do have this issue of what do we do about those disciplines that just can't do OER, where there are structures in place, there are things that they need that will never be free. So for example, you have courses like a literature course where they want students to read a book that just came out last month or last year. You're not going to find that free. So we need to find a way to address those issues. Perhaps you buy paper copies in bulk at the college and just give those books to the students when you have that kind of barrier, or get electronic copies, or have the institution pay for it. We have lots of copyright-dependent disciplines where there are specific resources that you need to teach about in the class. Well, you could purchase access to those copyright resources, images and such, for example, and then have OER wrapped around them to provide the content, so that instead of just saying, we're going to use that publisher's textbook because they've paid for all those copyrighted images, take it a different direction. There are also ways where resources can be made available through a library. I just recently saw a college where for some of the books that their nursing students need, nurses have like big, huge, expensive books. They had 325 licenses for the book that was in the library. So it's an electronic book, but with 325 licenses, that means 325 students could be using that at the same time. So effectively, they bought the book for everybody. So we think that what you should do is take steps to reduce costs and get them as low as you possibly can, and then leverage the buying power of the state to make those resources free so that we can have a zero textbook cost degree that has OER where you can have OER, and then we found other creative ways to make the cost something that the system can absorb. And then when there's no more money, then those costs would probably get passed on to students, but at least if we put this structure in place, we would delay that and we would work on keeping those costs as low as possible for as long as possible. So I point that out in part because the legislation redefines zero. We all know what zero means. We probably can't agree on what low cost means. And the legislation basically says zero textbook cost degrees can include low cost options. So they basically have taken zero and said zero is not zero. And so we're hoping to change that course to really say, if I'm going to sell you on a zero textbook cost degree, those textbooks really are going to be zero cost instead of low cost. Any of you at a college that has like a low cost designation in their schedule? Yeah. Do you know how much low cost is at your college? Do you know how much low cost is at your college?
I don't know about the low cost. I was thinking about
The zero cost. Yeah. Okay. Anyone have low cost and know what it is? Yeah.
I think it's under $50.
Under $50. I don't know about you, but $50 still isn't low cost to me today, and I'm not one of you guys. So, yeah, so we have colleges that are at 30, 40, and 50. So low cost already, for colleges that have already identified such things, they haven't decided what it should be. And in fact, we're taking a resolution forward to say that there should be a statewide definition of low cost, and we should be working with you all to decide what that definition should be. And so I'm hoping that's something that the Academic Senate will approve or pass in November. Yeah?
Are we talking about zero to enroll in the class or zero for the textbook?
No, so we're saying so right now the reason you see a zero cost logo in your schedules of classes, hopefully, is because there is a law that says we're supposed to do that. Now, that doesn't mean we're doing it well or consistently, but there is a law that says we're supposed to do that. But some colleges, in part because of those disciplines that can't fit into that zero textbook cost space, have adopted low cost definitions so that a student can go in and say, oh, these are no cost, these are less than 50, less than 40, and then who knows what these others are. And so it's just specifically about textbook costs. But yeah, there are other efforts out there to take care of the rest of the costs. Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah.
Could
Sorry.
you, sorry, my dog decided to scratch at the same time that I was talking. Could you repeat the questions from the audience? Because I don't think those of us on Zoom can.
Thank you. So I had asked about low cost designators, and we did have one person who says that they have one at their college and it's 50, and I will do that from now on. Thank you. I should know better. Yes.
So I think, so this is like a new and upcoming thing, right? It's like new. So what about like, how do you plan to get the word out? Like, do you plan to incorporate it within like the FAFSA application? You know, it's open right now, everyone knows about FAFSA. Because this is new and upcoming, I don't think like, you know, most people wouldn't know about this. So how do you plan to get the word out?
So the question is, how do we get the word out about all of this? All right, there's my quick summary. OER has been around for a while. Zero textbook costs have been around for a while. The legislation that we are supposed to mark all of our course sections that are zero textbook cost has been in effect, I want to say, since 2018. So these things have been happening. We have a network for making sure faculty know about it. We're very connected to all the faculty across the state. But I'd love to be working with the Student Senate to make sure all the students know about it, and so the students can be advocates for this work as well. Because as I said in the beginning, it is really true that one of the best ways to convince a faculty member of doing something is that what you're being asked to do is good for the students. And so that is huge, and that's where you all can help us make this move forward. It's really, yeah, good question. All right, so I said all that. 0 needs to be 0. That makes sense, right? Okay. So the legislation says that the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office, where your lovely presenter Daisy came from, that we have grants that should result in the development, should not result in the development or implementation of duplicate degrees for a subject matter to avoid duplication of effort. So the legislation specifically is sort of saying you don't all get to sit down and develop a new textbook for intro psych because they already exist. So there's some protections in the language around the fact that we shouldn't be duplicating efforts. And we're not sure how that's going to happen, but at least it's the right direction to take the conversation. If you just throw it out there and say, hey, everyone, develop ZTC degrees, you could have everyone saying, okay, we have an intro psych degree that's ZTC, which actually doesn't take much because there already is OER for most of the courses. But what we need to do is really help people find those courses that nobody has gotten to 0 and get those courses to 0 and spread that across the system. And which comes to this: ensure the development and implementation of the greatest number of degrees for the benefit of the greatest number of students. So the more courses and degrees that we can make available and certificates to students, then that's going to have the bigger effect. So as I read this, it's about not just focusing on what that college or district can do, but what can we do as a state so that every student at every college has access to a wide array of courses and degrees at 0 textbook cost. So it references sustainable, it references being non-duplicative, and it calls on the colleges to develop things that other community college districts can also adapt. So as again, we don't know exactly how this is all going to roll out, but these are pieces in the language that suggest that things are going to happen in a thoughtful way. As I shared with you, what we've been doing is providing funds to faculty and basically saying, put a team together. And we are only awarding funds when we have faculty from at least 3 different districts coming together to work on a resource so that we know there's a good chance that that resource is actually going to get used across multiple districts, and then hopefully within those districts, colleges and so forth, so that we pass it on and everyone is aware of the resources. So what do you guys need to make OER resources truly work for you? So I'm going to cheat and give you the answers that I think of for you or that we think of for you, and then you can tell me if I missed anything or if I'm completely wrong. I don't mind being wrong. It's kind of fun sometimes. Oh, wrong slide. I got my slides out of order. All right, we'll go back to that because you'll be interested in that. Students should know what a course will cost at the time of registration. You are supposed to have that information right now. Right now, we are all taking federal funds for something, and there are federal rules that say when you go in to look at and register for classes, you shouldn't just know which courses are ZTC or which are low cost. You should also know exactly how much every course costs. And so I think that's super important for you all to make good decisions when you're selecting your courses. We want to also look at how do we ensure that a student is not negatively impacted if who is teaching the class and the resources used for the class would change. Julie, do you want to speak to that briefly since it came up at your college?
Yeah, so sometimes when instructors are assigned classes, something could happen where that instructor cannot take the class or has an emergency and needs to pull out. What we're trying to do is, and we've got a resolution coming through the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges that will hopefully be adopted, where we're going to provide some guidance for our local colleges to create policies that help to, well, there's a couple of considerations, but really that help to create a smooth transition so that if in fact an instructor has designated an OER or even a regular textbook, and we have students that are signed up for those classes and they've either got their OER or they've bought their textbook, we want to make sure that we really minimize the impact on the student with that change of instructor, because sometimes instructors can come in and then want to change things, want to change the resource that they're using, and that can cause some disruption. So we're hoping to be able to provide some guidance for our colleagues at their local colleges to create policies where it basically says, you know what, work with your administration, work with the folks in the library so that students are not impacted by this change. So if I had adopted an OER and then I have to pull out of a class and Michelle takes over for me and Michelle wants to then charge her students a text, her students to get a textbook that's then going to cost, you know, $50. How do we make sure that students aren't dramatically impacted by that particular shift? And there can be a number of ways. The administration could agree to buy the students those textbooks, or buy a bunch of those textbooks that they can put on the library so the students can check them out. It's just trying to mitigate damage when we have that kind of changes in the schedule for the students. While, and I'm going to say while still protecting the academic freedom of the instructor coming in, who needs to be able to teach that class in the best way that they possibly can as a professional. I hope that was clear. Was that clear, Michelle?
I think, did that work? Did that make sense? So if you've signed up for something because you thought it was going to cost nothing, you should not suddenly have to spend a bunch of money. At the same time, if you signed up for a course where there was a book and you went and bought the book and then suddenly you can't return the book and now you no longer need the book, things should be done to make it so that you don't have to suffer those burdens.
We're really trying to minimize the impact on the students and actually on the faculty member to create a smooth transition.
Yeah. One of the things that we, as I said earlier, for the faculty member changing textbooks, you want that OER experience to be as much like the publisher's experience in that there's resources to help you. At the same time, if you don't like looking at something on a computer screen or on your phone or like electronically, period, printing should be readily available. And always you should have library copies. So if you, I can totally see where you're reading stuff online and then you just hit this one chapter that just doesn't work with your brain and you need it on paper so you can mark it up and look at it and, you know, burn it when the class is over. We need to make that available to you. Not to burn it necessarily, but just we need to make that available to you. If that is what you prefer, you should have that access to it. We already talked about zero should be zero, low cost and no cost should be differentiated. I already mentioned our belief that low cost should be defined in consultation with students. And we really believe that those ZTC degrees should be available to students beyond the availability of the 115 million. There should be a way to make sure that those opportunities exist for students once the $115 million is gone. So that sustainability element. So what else do you guys need for this to work for you? Yeah.
So the students that may not have access to Wi-Fi or any kind of internet type of stuff.
Yep.
Homeless and
Yep, that's a great point. And we know lots of colleges struggled with that and worked with that and came up with creative solutions over the last year and a half of, you know, making it so that they're loaning computers, loaning whatever it is, so you get remote, you know, you like the things so that you actually like have like an, what's it called? Hotspot. Thank you. I knew someone would know it. It was just totally left my brain. Yeah, I think that's absolutely a good point. And that is where if you're printing, then that probably means you actually have the resource in a downloadable format so that you could actually have it on a device where you didn't actually have to have the internet to do it. And there are more sophisticated things where you could have, actually have a more dynamic resource where you don't have the internet, but you do, but you have it electronically accessible without the internet. So there are things out there of that sort. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a question. Wendell has a question. Wendell?
Yes. I'm not sure if that question in the audience was referring to everything that I have a question about, but in terms of being a technical major, my major is architectural technology and environmental design, and yeah, they do have free laptops at my school. Unfortunately, they're not good enough or not capable of running some of the software that architecture students have to use. And also, yes, the data is another expense. And also, external storage is a very big part of being able to maintain records of your assignments and large projects. And so while I think that they have sort of addressed it, like at my school, they gave out Chromebooks, but Chromebooks will not cut it.
Okay, so that absolutely is related. And I apologize for not having repeated the question. Yeah, so there are, I mean, there are always going to be those technical difficulties. I would love to know more about your discipline and the kind of resources that you're using. And so we'll give you emails at the end. And so I'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to drop your email in the chat and Julie will grab it and we'll reach out to you afterwards. I'm always wanting to understand those disciplines with the unique challenges, because often if you figure out ways to address those unique challenges, there's all sorts of downstream things that you can help at the same time. So it becomes sort of a big win. Other issues. So as I said, sometimes people are concerned that there isn't OER out there or that OER isn't moving quickly enough. And so I wanted to just share some data with you. We did some schedule sleuthing, actually going and looking across all of our colleges and seeing how many sections of a couple specific courses are offered as zero textbook cost. And so in part because I teach psychology and Julie teaches public speaking, we looked at those two courses. What we found is that 6 of our colleges have every single one of their sections in this current term as ZTC. So that really shows you intro psych, you can do it, and we've got entire departments that have done it. And I'll acknowledge right here, I think one of the colleges only had 3 sections. It was a very small college, but other ones were quite large and still had everyone using it. Another 3 are in the 80 to 99% range. 99% range, and at least 56 colleges have at least one faculty member who has a ZTC section. So basically, 50% of our colleges are able to have one faculty member at least teach an intro psychology course that's zero textbook cost, which really makes it pretty clear that there's no reason to not be teaching intro psych with zero textbook cost. Public speaking, another big course, particularly because it's required when you're transferring, or something along those lines is required when you're transferring to CSU. 9 colleges, 100% of 21 fall sections are ZTC. That's huge, particularly because there are tons of sections of this course. Another 8 in that over 80%, but less than 100%. At least 60 colleges have at least one faculty member who has a ZTC section. So what this shows you is that for these 2 courses, OER is out there, or something to get to ZTC. In most instances, I was able to go in and confirm that they were using OER, and that's how they got there. There's like 3 different books that people are using for public speaking, and about as many for intro psych. We're now working on English composition. And the numbers are looking pretty good, where you'd be able to say, look at, we have all these colleges that have got this course to 0, let's all do it. So this is the kind of information we're trying to pull together to help in those conversations when people are concerned that they can't do it, or just see some kind of barrier, to figure out how we can help them to get there. And then of course we have those more complicated courses that are going to take more work to get them to ZTC. So I wanted to point out, here's our website. And one of the things that you can find on our website is we have mapped OER to the entire CSU GE pattern to show that you could do an entire CSU GE, complete the whole thing using OER. The one exception in that document shows that there are no OER for certain lab courses. We do now have OER for those lab courses. You just have to get someone to pay for printing them because you want to have your lab manual in front of you. But I just wanted to point that out. We also have all kinds of webinars and events, and we're happy to have you all there. We love anyone who wants to come. And there is our general email if you have questions. If after this you have any questions about anything that we talked about or resources that we mentioned, that will get you the information that you're looking for. Julie, anything in the chat?
You know what? I'm reading. Hold on. Let me look. Sorry. Okay, so Colby had a comment. He says, I feel that you have a very important goal, but in order for people to do the research that goes into the textbook, there's always a profit motive. Why would anyone work for free? That's a really great question. Michelle, did I lose you?
No, I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here thinking about all the times that I work for free.
I know.
Yeah. So,
You know,
yeah. Go ahead.
Colby, I completely understand where you're going. I think that we are really sort of special in the California community colleges because we have faculty that are here because they love to teach. We're not at a university where we have to do research and publish or perish. I'm sure you've heard that phrase where it's dependent on your job, the research that you do and the number of times that you get published. Our jobs are dependent on teaching. And so anything I think that helps us do that, we directly see the value in our classrooms as we're working with our students. So you're right. It would, you know what, it would be lovely if I got paid for everything that I do, but that never happens. So I think there's also something of there's an altruistic motive, but there's also the motive of what I do with open educational resources makes my teaching better and more rewarding, and I get to connect better with my students and build those relationships. And I think for many of us, that feeling of connection and supporting is just so incredibly motivating.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was good, but I think the other thing is when a faculty member is actually developing a resource, we don't ask them to do that for free. They do receive compensation. The team of faculty that Julie mentioned that's working on intercultural communication, they are being supported in help to how to do things, and they're also being compensated. But to some extent they're not being they're not spending 10 hours and getting paid for 10 hours. They're being compensated for doing the work. And so it necessarily has to partially be a labor of love, something that they want to do. We also have a group of faculty that are doing a biological psychology textbook, and that which is one where there is nothing right now. And so those are two things that can be really, both books are ones that will hopefully be really impactful. And each of these has teams of like 8 to 12 faculty from across the state. So those books, when they're done, they're going to get out there and be out there across the state, and hopefully the use will go well beyond the faculty that are working on them. We have a bunch of other projects too, but those are projects that we're sort of coordinating centrally, as opposed to having faculty develop, respond to a request for proposals. Yeah.
Some of the courses that I'm taking, they are OER, but these are textbooks that have been, there are other, paid for universities that were allowed to be used. And some of them have interactive software that we can access their websites and stuff online. Are they being underwritten for us to be able to do that? And if so, is there a way that we can encourage more?
What college are you at?
Long Beach City College.
So I'm not sure what's going on there. So he said he's at a college where you seem to have free access to copyrighted textbooks.
It seems to me because I don't know about, they're like my African history the whole thing is online, and it's not just for city colleges.
Well, OER is out there, and it's everyone can be using it. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'd have to look into that a little bit more. So, for example, OpenStax is a OER quote publisher, and I say quote publisher because they really are a publisher. One of the things that they do is they make it easy for your bookstore to get the print copies, which is fine and nice as long as you don't have to buy the print copy. You can go get it for free. But those books have been wildly popular. They have an intro psych textbook, which is used by an incredible number of our colleges, in part because there is that ease of access to it for the faculty and also for the students. And then they also offer some of those wraparound services that make it easier. So, so you have any OER that we create would be OER that we would give back to the broader community, and the broader community shares everything that they're doing. So you have this open extends beyond California. There's a whole robust community around OER that shares things like crazy. And so it could be that you are talking about an open resource that was developed at another university. For example, one of the M states, Minnesota, I believe, has a robust collection of OER that if you were accessing it, if you were accessing it through their electronic portal, you would know you were within the University of Minnesota, but what you're accessing is an open educational resource.
I can think of an example in this one particular class. The textbook is like $35 or something like that, but the online was free to me, and it's actually so much better than textbook because it's fully interactive and all that. And I haven't had to pay for any licensing or anything.
That's great.
I only get to use it for the one semester, and then
So it sounds like it sounds like you paid for that access when you purchased the $35 textbook.
no, I didn't.
Okay.
We didn't
All right.
have choice either buy the book or
Okay. I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that. I'll find out about that. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, the Zoom folks can't hear.
Oh, sorry.
What's happening in the audience.
Sorry. So one of our people in the room has a textbook experience where there was a $35 textbook that you could purchase, but then separately from that, there was a free interactive version of the textbook. And so we're going to find out exactly what was going on there, because it could be that the free interactive version was always out there and free, and then you just happen to have the print version that was out there, and some students may have not realized that they don't have to buy the print version. And that is something that sometimes you see in course schedules where it'll look like you have to buy the printed cost version. And so that's something that we're hoping colleges will work on fixing. Back to the resolutions that we've written, we have one encouraging faculty to look at how their resources are represented in the schedule to make sure that students aren't being misled. Because sometimes you'll go, and if you look, there's like, $35 for the printed version, or go here and get it for free, which is often smaller and harder to see. So we have some things to address there. All right, we are past time. Any last questions from the people that we've neglected online?
I think we're okay. You know what? I've been doing some responding. Okay. We've had some good conversations in here. But no, I think, I think that you lost us a little bit on that last interaction.
Okay, all right. I apologize to all of you. You can email me and ask questions, and I will respond. And thank you all so very much. Have a great the rest of your day. And I'm here if you have any questions. Happy to talk to you all. Thank you.
Yeah.